I yelled, "Ma'am, I think your dog just tasted my blood." It wasn't a scream of fear, more like stunned confusion. I was crouched down in front of the old hardware store on Maple and 6th, trying to retie my shoelace with one hand while balancing a grocery bag in the other. That's when a scruffy, golden-colored mutt came trotting up out of nowhere. He didn't bark, didn't sniff, didn't beg. He just walked straight up, sat down, and began licking my hands like he knew me. Or more specifically, like he needed to. I didn't have food on me. I hadn't been near another dog. I wasn't bleeding, at least I didn't think so. He kept going. Gentle, repetitive licks across the back of my hands, pausing only to glance up at me with these huge, honey-colored eyes that had no business being that expressive. "Hey there, buddy," I said, trying to give him a friendly pat while keeping my balance. "You lost?" No collar, no tags, just a thick, uneven coat of fur that made him look like he'd been sleeping under cars and dodging rain for weeks. But he was clean. Oddly clean. His ears were upright and twitchy, like radar dishes tuned to the world around us. A woman stepped out of the flower shop next door, brushing her apron down. "That your dog?" I shook my head. "Never seen him before." "But he's acting like I owe him money," she laughed, though her eyes narrowed. "He's been around. A few of us leave out food. He never lets anyone touch him, though. Not until now." That made me pause. I looked down. The dog's licking had stopped. He was now simply pressing his nose gently to my palm, just holding it there. No nudge, no bite, just touching. I stood up slowly, watching him. He didn't flinch, just followed my every move, eyes never leaving mine. "What's your name?" I asked, crouching back down. "You've got to belong to somebody." He responded with a soft whine, then took a step closer and licked my hand again. The flower shop lady, whose name I later learned was Janice, offered me a paper towel. "You bleeding?" "Nope, not a scratch on me." I held up my hands, turning them over. "See? Nothing." She tilted her head. "Might be something deeper. Dogs are weird like that." I laughed it off, but her words stuck. I don't know what compelled me to do what I did next. I had errands, I had work, but something about this dog, and those eyes, made me change course. I took my grocery bag home, came back with a leash I'd used for my old beagle, and found him lying in the exact same spot. "You still waiting?" I asked. He stood up immediately. He didn't resist the leash. He didn't run. He walked beside me like we'd done this 1,000 times before. When we reached the vet clinic on Elm Street, I explained the situation. No chip, no ID. But the receptionist, a young guy named Ben, said they'd check him out, maybe board him overnight if I couldn't keep him. I offered to cover whatever exam he needed. It just felt right. The dog didn't even whimper when they took him in the back, just looked at me over his shoulder like, "You're still there, right?" I waited. Ben came back an hour later, a file folder in his hand, and a look of stunned disbelief on his face. "So, this might sound crazy," he said, "but there's something you should see." They brought the dog back into the exam room, tail wagging slowly, like he was trying to be polite. Dr. Carroll, the vet, pulled up an image on the monitor, a scan of his abdomen. "There's metal inside him," she said. "Screws, plates, surgical remnants. But that's not the crazy part." She turned the screen again. "This isn't recent. He's had this for years. This dog was somebody's. And not just anybody's. Whoever he was with took care of him like family. Expensive surgery, good post-op recovery. But here's what's wild. He also has old trauma to his snout and jawline. He was probably muzzled hard at some point, maybe even abused before the surgery." Ben chimed in. We've seen dogs do weird things when they remember people. They associate smells, especially emotional scents, sweat, tears. You said he wouldn't stop licking your hands? I nodded. Dr. Carroll said, it's likely he smelled something he associates with safety or comfort, possibly even someone from his past. But I don't know him, I said. I've never seen him before. She nodded slowly. Maybe not. But maybe someone you knew did. Or maybe you smell like someone he once trusted. It got real quiet after that. The dog, who they started calling Theo, rested his head on my knee. Janice from the flower shop came by the next morning when she heard I was fostering him. She brought treats, a squeaky toy shaped like a sunflower, and a big bag of food. Guess he picked his human, she said. Over the next week, I couldn't go anywhere without Theo. He followed me to the mailbox, the coffee shop, even waited outside the bathroom door like a bodyguard. But he never barked, never jumped, just watched me like he was waiting for something. I found myself talking to him, telling him things I hadn't said aloud in years, about my brother who passed, about my dad's old truck that I still hadn't fixed, about that one time I nearly moved to Colorado but changed my mind because of a coin flip. One night, while watching an old home video, I saw it. In the background, at a 4th of July party from 10 years ago, there was a golden dog. Same fur, same ears, same eyes, and next to him, my brother. The camera zoomed in for a second, long enough to catch my brother petting him, calling him something that sounded like Theo. I paused the video. My hands were shaking. Theo, now lying on my feet, lifted his head. "Is that you?" I whispered. He licked my hand. Not frantic, not needy, just once, soft, certain. And somehow that single lick explained everything. We had just started our story. "You're not going to believe this," I told Janice as she handed me a cup of chamomile tea the next morning. We were standing in front of her flower shop again, the sun barely up, and Theo lying right beside me like he had done this every day for years. He wasn't leashed anymore. He didn't need to be. Janice leaned in. "Try me." I told her about the video, about the dog in the background, and how my brother, Nathan, had been calling him Theo. Her eyes widened, and then she slowly looked down at the dog. "You think it's him?" "I don't know, but I've watched that clip maybe 20 times now, and every time I say the name Theo, this guy looks at me like he's waiting for something more." Janice crouched beside him. "Well, he sure looks like he belongs somewhere, or with someone. Maybe that someone's you." I had no idea what to do with that. All I knew was that ever since I found him, or he found me, my life had shifted. Not in any big, dramatic way, but in those small, quiet ways you don't notice until you look back and realize something's changed. My apartment felt less empty. My mornings didn't drag. I started cooking again. Theo followed me from room to room. He waited by the door every morning, tail wagging, ready to follow me wherever I went. But he wasn't needy. He just seemed to want to be there, like he had a job to do, and that job was watching over me. We stopped by the vet clinic again for a follow-up checkup. Dr. Carroll gave him a clean bill of health, and Ben came out from the back to sneak him a liver treat. "He remembers you," Ben said. "Look at that tail." "He's been like this ever since I brought him home," I said. "It's like he's working through something." Dr. Carroll nodded. "It's not uncommon. Dogs that have had trauma or long separations, they sometimes behave like they're guarding more than just a person, like they're holding on to a piece of someone who's gone." I didn't say anything for a while. Neither did Theo. He just laid his head on my shoe again. That afternoon, I went digging through Nathan's old things. My brother had passed almost 8 years ago, and I hadn't had the strength to do a full sort-through since the funeral. But now, I needed to know. I opened the storage box labeled Nathan's Garage and pulled out a cracked photo frame. Inside was a picture of him leaning against his old truck, smiling with his hand resting on a golden dog. That same floppy ear, that same look. And there, written in faded ink across the bottom, Nathan and Theo, 2012. I stared at it until the sun shifted through the blinds and lit up the photo like someone had turned a spotlight on it. I held it up so Theo could see. He sniffed it, then placed his paw on my knee. I sat down on the floor. "You waited this long?" He tilted his head. "I didn't know," I said, and my throat got tight. "I didn't even think to look for you." Theo just leaned in and rested his whole weight against my side. We started taking walks in the mornings. It wasn't something I used to do. Mornings weren't my thing, but now it felt like something we both needed. Around the block, past the diner, over by the creek trail. Theo always trotted ahead a few paces, then turned around to make sure I was still coming. People started recognizing him. One woman pointed and said, "That's the dog from outside Thompson's auto. He used to sleep under the old Chevy out front." An older man said, "Saw him last winter near the train tracks. Poor thing looked like he was waiting for someone who never came." Each sighting felt like another piece of a puzzle. Theo hadn't just wandered into my life. He had been circling, waiting for something, or someone, to pull him in. At one point, I got curious enough to drive out to Nathan's old place. It was still there, though the paint had faded and the windows were dusty. The new owners were kind enough to let me walk around the backyard. Theo didn't hesitate. He went straight for the far corner under the oak tree, where an old ceramic bowl still sat buried halfway in the ground. He sniffed it, then lay down beside it. I sat on the porch steps, watching him. "You remembered," I said. Later that week, I started working from home more often. My job allowed it, and frankly, I didn't feel like leaving Theo alone, even if he was content to nap on the rug. It was around this time I started noticing how quiet things had gotten in my head. The usual stress, the weight I didn't even realize I was carrying, it had lifted. Or at least, shifted. Having Theo there gave me a rhythm, something to anchor my day to. It wasn't long before the local paper picked up the story. Janice had told a customer who knew someone at the Gazette, and a young reporter named Kyle called asking if he could do a piece. "He found his way back to family," Kyle said. "That's the kind of story people need right now." I agreed. Theo and I met him at the park. Kyle snapped some photos, asked about Nathan, asked about the 4th of July video. He even got a few shots of Theo sitting proudly beside the oak tree where we liked to rest. The story ran 2 Sundays later. Headline, "Stray Dog's Long Journey Leads Back to Love." It had a photo of me and Theo under the tree, and the article ended with something I didn't say, but didn't mind them adding, "Some dogs don't get lost. They just take the long way home." That week, letters came, emails, even a few neighbors I hadn't spoken to before came by with dog treats and blankets. One lady dropped off a hand-knitted scarf with Theo's name stitched into it. He wore it for a whole hour before rolling in the leaves and getting it covered in dirt. Typical Theo. One afternoon, while Theo was dozing by the window, I found another video clip buried in an old thumb drive. This one showed Nathan teaching Theo to play a game with tennis balls. Drop one, wait 5 seconds, then fetch. Theo had been a natural. He'd run, wait, then launch like a rocket. I tried it in the yard, dropped the ball, waited, said, "Go." Theo hesitated only a second. Then he sprinted. He remembered. My chest tightened in that familiar way, the way it did when you realize something both wonderful and heartbreaking at the same time. He had remembered. All of it. Maybe not with pictures or words like we do, but with feelings, with instincts. That night, I sat with Theo on the porch as the sky dimmed into lavender. We didn't say anything, obviously. He's a dog. But I felt like I didn't need to. Whatever he had carried all those years, it had brought him back. And maybe what I had carried brought me to the exact spot where he'd find me. Some people believe in signs. Some people don't. But I believed in Theo. And I knew this wasn't the end of something. It was just the middle. Because if a dog like Theo could find his way back, then maybe, just maybe, the rest of us could too. There were still questions, still things I didn't know, but I didn't need to know everything. Not yet. We had time. And Theo was already waiting at the door. I never expected Theo to become the most recognizable face in town. But by the time fall rolled in, and the air started smelling like pine needles and chimney smoke, it seemed like everyone had a Theo story. Kids at the park waved when they saw us coming. Seniors on porches leaned forward to ask how he was doing. Even the guy at the car wash, who never said more than 3 words to me before, now nodded and said, "That dog's got eyes like a man who's seen things." It was the eyes, always. Everyone commented on them. Theo didn't just look at you. He looked through you, like he was checking your heart for cracks. Our daily walks expanded. We started making stops at the library, where Theo would sit quietly by the door while I returned books. Miss Cindy, the head librarian, kept a biscuit in her drawer labeled Theo Only. He knew it too. The second I said library, his ears perked. But it wasn't all sunshine. One morning, I noticed Theo limping. It was slight at first, just a hitch in his step. He still wagged his tail, still followed me to the kitchen and back. But when we went out for our usual walk, he hesitated at the stairs. I bent down and checked his paws. Nothing sharp. No cuts. "Hey," I said gently, brushing back the fur on his leg. "You all right?" He looked up at me with calm acceptance. No whine, no complaint. But he didn't put weight on that back leg. I called Dr. Carroll and drove him over that afternoon. He sat in the passenger seat like he knew exactly where we were going. Ben met us at the door. "What's up, Theo?" he asked, scratching behind his ear. "Not feeling like chasing tennis balls today?" Inside, Dr. Carroll ran the usual checks. Theo tolerated everything. X-rays, pressure tests, like a seasoned pro. She left the room for a bit, then came back holding a printout. "There's some mild arthritis in his back left joint," she explained. "It's not unusual, especially for a dog his age and breed. Nothing urgent, but it'll need managing." My gut tightened. What does that mean, managing? Anti-inflammatories, low-impact exercise, a good diet, some supplements. He'll be fine, as long as we don't push him too hard. Theo seemed to agree. On the way home, he curled up in the passenger seat and let out a deep, slow sigh. I reached over and rubbed the top of his head. "You're not going anywhere," I whispered. The next morning, we swapped our usual walk for a slower loop around the lake. Theo took his time. I brought a collapsible bowl and a thermos of water, and we stopped every 10 minutes or so for a rest. That's when we met Mike. Mike was a retired carpenter who now walked the lake trail every morning with a thermos of black coffee and a long walking stick he'd carved himself. He had silver hair, sun-damaged skin, and a voice that sounded like gravel shifting in a tin can. But he had a warmth about him. "Beautiful dog," he said when he spotted Theo. Golden Retriever mix? I nodded. We think so. Rescued. Or maybe he rescued me. Mike chuckled. They have a way of doing that, don't they? We talked for nearly an hour. Mike told me about his old dog, Samson, who used to wait by the back gate every day until Mike came home from work. Said Samson passed 3 winters ago, and he hadn't gotten another dog since. I still dream about him, Mike said, sipping his coffee. Dream he's still out there, waiting. Theo walked over and laid his head against Mike's knee. Mike froze. Well, I'll be, he muttered, rubbing Theo's ears. He feels like one of the old ones. From that day on, Mike became part of our morning routine. He started bringing an extra thermos, decaf for me, full strength for himself, and a pocket full of dried apple chips Theo came to adore. We sat by the lake often, watching the ducks, letting time move however it wanted. One morning, Mike asked, "What's your story?" I told him about Nathan, about how we found Theo, about the video. Mike just nodded slowly. Sometimes, he said, when people leave, they don't take everything with them. Sometimes what they leave behind is exactly what we need. One chilly Tuesday, while raking leaves in the backyard, I found an old wooden box tucked into the far corner of the shed. Inside were scraps of fabric, broken tools, and, at the very bottom, a tag. A brass name tag shaped like a bone, scuffed and faded, but still legible. Theo. I brought it inside, cleaned it up, and looped it onto the new collar I'd gotten him. He didn't react much, just sat down beside me and rested his chin on my knee like he'd been waiting for that one final piece. That night, I had a dream. It was simple. Nathan was sitting on the porch, drinking root beer from a glass bottle. Theo was beside him, a younger, wilder version, tail wagging like crazy. Nathan looked up and smiled. Took you long enough. I woke up before I could ask what he meant. The next few weeks passed in that golden, easy rhythm you only recognize in hindsight. Theo had good days and slower days. We adjusted. I started learning the difference between his hungry bark and his let's go outside stare. One Saturday, I got a call from the Gazette. Kyle again. They were doing a follow-up piece. Would you and Theo come to the local school? The kids there want to meet him. So we did. We showed up the following Friday at Willow Elementary. Theo wore a little red bandana Janice had sewn for him, and as soon as the kids saw him, they exploded with excitement. They asked questions. They wanted to pet him. One little boy hugged him and whispered, "You're magic." Theo just lay there, tail thumping gently, like this was the job he'd trained for all his life. On our way out, a teacher stopped me. "Thank you," she said. "We've got a few kids here going through some tough things. This gave them something bright." That night, I wrote my brother's name on a scrap of paper and slipped it into Theo's old box, along with the photo from 2012. I didn't know what to call what we were building, me and this dog who had come back from somewhere far, but I knew it was real, and I knew it mattered. And somehow, I felt Nathan did too. The first real snow of the season arrived early that year, thick and heavy, blanketing the streets before anyone had time to dig out their coats. It came overnight, and by morning, the whole neighborhood looked like a postcard. Theo was already standing by the door when I woke up, tail wagging slow and steady. I opened the back door, and without hesitation he bounded out into the yard, nose diving straight into the snow like it was a long-lost treasure. I couldn't help but laugh. He looked like a living snowball with legs, rolling and snorting and pouncing like he was half his age. I grabbed my boots and a scarf and followed him out. We walked our usual trail around the lake, slower than usual, our footprints the only ones cutting through the white. Everything was silent, except for the occasional creak of bending branches and the crunch of snow underfoot. Theo paused every so often, sniffing at patches under the trees or pawing gently at frozen leaves. I wondered if he remembered winters past, if the snow pulled something up from the corners of his memory. He didn't act uncertain, more like he was greeting something familiar. Back home, I made him a bed by the fireplace, tossing a couple of thick blankets over the rug. He curled up there without protest, resting his head on his paws, while the flames cast shadows on the walls. Later that day, Mike dropped by with a wooden toy he'd whittled. It was a crude shape of a dog, flat ears, long tail, but charming, like everything Mike made. He handed it to me with a shrug. Didn't know if he'd care, but figured I'd try. Theo sniffed it and gave it a single lick before turning in a circle and flopping back down. Mike chuckled. I'll take that as a yes. Over the next week, the snow kept falling. Schools closed, roads froze, and the town slowed to a crawl. But Theo kept his rhythm. Morning walks, midday naps, evening patrols by the front window. We had become, without really trying, something of a ritual ourselves. One morning, I got a call from a man named David Turner. He said he was Nathan's old friend from college, someone I hadn't heard from in years. He'd read the Gazette piece and called after digging my number out of an old group message. I think I might know where Theo was before you found him, he said. He told me Nathan had brought Theo upstate during a camping trip years ago. When Nathan passed, Theo had been staying with another friend from that trip, Sam, who ran a small workshop up in Hollow Creek. David explained that after Nathan's funeral, Sam had tried to keep Theo, but a car accident had landed Sam in the hospital for weeks. By the time he recovered, Theo was gone. Just gone. Sam looked for him for months, David said. Put up flyers, called shelters, but it's like Theo vanished. I jotted everything down, thanked him, and hung up. Then I looked at Theo, still curled in his usual spot, watching me like he understood every word. You really have been through it, haven't you? I called Sam. He was still living in Hollow Creek, running his shop part-time now. When I explained everything, he went quiet. Then he said, I never thought I'd hear that name again. We talked for over an hour. He told me stories about Theo, how he used to chase deer but never caught them, how he once dragged an entire log back to camp like it was a stick. He asked if he could come meet him. I agreed, on one condition. If Theo chose to stay with me, I hoped Sam would understand. He did. Sam came 2 days later, driving 4 hours through half-melted snow and fog. He brought a canvas bag filled with Theo's old toys and a frayed rope leash that looked more like a relic than a tool. Theo sniffed him the moment he walked in, circled once, then sat beside me. Sam knelt. Hey, buddy. Theo gave him a polite sniff, then leaned his head briefly into Sam's chest before turning and walking back to the fireplace. Sam smiled. Guess he's made his choice. We spent the evening talking, trading stories about Nathan. It felt good, like closing a chapter without losing the story. Before Sam left, he handed me a photo. It was one I'd never seen. Nathan sitting on the back of a truck bed with Theo in his lap, both of them looking at something off camera. That's the last one I took, Sam said. Thought it belonged with you. I framed it and placed it on the mantel, right above where Theo usually lay. He stared at it for a while the first night, like he was trying to remember. Days turned into weeks. Theo's limp stayed manageable. His coat grew thicker with winter. His eyes still sharp, still searching. softened a little more each day. Then came the night the power went out. A bad windstorm had hit, knocking trees onto lines all over the county. We lit candles, made a nest of blankets near the fireplace, and waited it out. I had just started drifting off when I felt Theo shift. He stood up suddenly, ears alert, body tense. "What is it?" I asked, sitting up. He moved toward the front door. I followed him, flashlight in hand. We stepped outside, the air brittle and sharp. The wind had died, but snow still clung to every branch. That's when I saw it. An elderly woman halfway up the street, hunched and shivering, trying to push a grocery cart through a patch of snow. Theo barked once. Sharp, urgent. We ran. She had slipped and was trying to stand. I helped her up, asked if she was okay. Her name was Helen, and her heater had gone out 2 nights ago. She'd been trying to make it to the shelter but lost her balance. I brought her inside, gave her hot tea, blankets, and let her stay in the guest room. Theo never left her side that night. He lay across the door like a guard. Helen stayed with us for 3 days until power was restored. She called us her angels, but I think we both knew who had really found her. After that, people started calling Theo a helper, a finder, a blessing. Kids waved when they saw him from school buses. The mailman started bringing extra dog biscuits, and I stopped trying to explain it all. Because whatever Theo was, rescue, guide, gift, he was here now. And that was enough for me. Theo started waking me up at exactly 6:42 every morning. Not 6:40, not 6:45, always 6:42. I checked the clock after the 3rd day just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. He'd sit by the edge of the bed, tail sweeping softly across the floor, and give a single, low woof. Never loud, never rushed, just enough to let me know he was ready. So we'd go. Even in the dark, even when frost clung to the windows and the wind bit through my sleeves, there was a calm to those early hours. Fewer cars, fewer people. Just the world waking up and Theo leading the way. We started walking a different path, past the lake and through the wooded trails behind the community college. The first time we took that route, Theo paused at the old footbridge and just stood there, staring across the water. His ears twitched, and he sniffed the air like he was reading something I couldn't see. I stood beside him, not saying a word. Then he crossed. I followed. On the other side, buried under leaves and bits of ice, was a weathered park bench with initials carved into the backrest. N+T. I froze. I ran my fingers along the letters. The carving was old, worn, but I knew those initials. Nathan and Theo. It must have been years ago, maybe during one of those solo walks Nathan used to take when things got too loud. He always needed space, a place to think, and apparently he'd brought Theo with him. Theo sat beside the bench like he'd never left. I didn't say anything, just sat down and let the silence fill in the rest. That afternoon, I visited Janice's shop. Theo waited patiently outside while I picked up a few plants for the house. When I came out, I saw a boy kneeling beside him, petting his ears like they were old friends. His mother stood nearby, watching nervously until I smiled and nodded. She relaxed a little, then said, "He usually won't go near dogs." The boy whispered something I couldn't hear, then stood up and gave Theo a wave before walking away. Back home, I found an old journal of Nathan's tucked into the back of a bookshelf. It wasn't anything formal, just bits and pieces, lists, memories, quotes. One entry stood out. "There are souls we don't meet by chance. Some wait for us. Some return. Theo is like that. Not just a dog. Something older. Something steady. I read it twice, then a third time, then looked down at Theo curled at my feet. He blinked at me. One slow blink, like a nod. Winter eventually began to lift. The days stretched a little longer, and color started creeping back into the landscape. Theo perked up with it, tail wagging more often, steps a bit lighter. I knew his leg still bothered him from time to time, but he never let it show unless he had to. We planted a few flowers in the backyard, just small ones, violets and pansies. Theo lay nearby, nose twitching at the scent of fresh soil. Every now and then, he'd bark once, as if supervising. Mike stopped by more often, too. He'd sit on the porch, coffee in hand, while Theo rested his head on his foot. They made a good pair, two quiet souls content to share the same patch of sunlight. Then came the day we met Clara. She showed up on a Thursday morning, walking past the house with a canvas satchel and a notebook tucked under her arm. Theo was on the porch, half asleep, but his head popped up the second he saw her. She stopped. Smiled. "Well, hello there," she said, approaching slowly. I stepped outside, wiping my hands on a rag from the kitchen. "He doesn't bite?" "I can tell," she said, crouching down. "He looks like he's been through something." "You have no idea." We got to talking. Turns out she'd just moved in a few streets over. Retired art teacher. Liked to walk early. She asked if she could sketch Theo sometime. "He's got the kind of face people remember," she said. The next morning, she showed up with a folding chair and a sketch pad. Theo lay still for nearly half an hour while she worked. Afterward, she handed me the drawing. It was him, all right. The curve of his ears, the intelligence in his eyes. But there was something more. An emotion, a sense of presence that felt exactly right. "I've drawn a lot of animals," she said. "Never one that looked back at me like that." We started seeing her more often. Theo took to her like he did to Mike, without hesitation, like he already knew. That's how it went for the next few weeks. Morning walks, afternoon visitors. A life slowly unfolding into something fuller, something richer. I started writing again, little things at first, postcards I never sent, lists of memories, letters to Nathan I didn't plan to mail. Theo always lay nearby, his breathing a quiet metronome in the room. One evening, I pulled out the box where I'd been keeping all of Theo's mementos, photos, the brass name tag, the drawing from Clara, the piece of rope leash Sam left behind. I added something new. The journal page from Nathan, the one about souls who return. Then I sat on the porch, Theo's head on my foot, and watched the stars come out. There was no music, no big revelation, just a quiet knowing that we were exactly where we were meant to be. Theo stirred, gave a small sigh, and fell asleep. And I followed soon after, dreaming of trails I hadn't walked yet, guided by the soft sound of paws beside me. Theo had a way of bringing people together, even when he wasn't trying. Maybe especially when he wasn't trying. By mid-spring, our porch had become a regular gathering spot. Mike stopped by every few days with fresh bread or something from his garden. Clara brought her drawings, sometimes just to leave them on the steps like little gifts. Even Janice started walking over after she closed her flower shop, just to sit and talk. It wasn't just about Theo, though. It was about what he represented. Something solid. Something kind. People need that. More than they admit. One afternoon, Clara asked if she could do a portrait of me and Theo together. "Nothing fancy," she said. "Just something real." We sat in the backyard under the oak tree, the one Nathan had always loved. Theo lay between us, head resting on my boot. I didn't move, didn't even breathe too loud. I just let the moment settle. A few days later, she came back with the finished piece. It wasn't just a picture. It was a memory captured on paper. You could feel the warmth, the trust, the years between us. I framed it that same night. That weekend, I finally tackled the garage. I'd been putting it off forever, but something about the way the sun was hitting the driveway made it feel like the right time. Theo followed me in, sniffing the corners like he remembered what used to be there. I found another box of Nathan's things: old tools, camping gear, a half-finished wooden frame. At the very bottom was a notebook wrapped in a flannel shirt. Inside were sketches, plans for building a cabin, just a small one, tucked beside the lake he used to visit. Theo nosed at the corner of the notebook, then looked up at me. "You remember that place?" I asked. He let out a short huff, then turned in a slow circle before settling down beside the box. The next morning, I drove us out to the lake. It wasn't a long trip, maybe 40 minutes, but it felt like a pilgrimage. The air was clean, the kind of clean that makes your lungs ache in a good way. Birds darted between trees. The water sparkled. We found the old clearing Nathan used to talk about. It was a little overgrown, but still open, still full of light. Theo walked straight to the center, lay down, and looked at me. I sat beside him, pulled out the notebook, opened to the first page. "Maybe we build something here," I said. "For him? For us?" He didn't respond, but I swear he smiled. Back in town, the idea took root. I started small: sketches, measurements, calls to hardware stores. Mike offered his help before I even asked. "Been too long since I swung a hammer," he said. Clara started bringing over sandwiches. "Fuel for builders," she insisted. Word got around. People donated scrap lumber, old nails, even a stack of unused insulation someone had stored in their shed since 2004. It wasn't big, it wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it stood, by the end of the month, exactly where Nathan had imagined it. We held a small gathering when it was finished. Not a ceremony, just a get-together. Friends, neighbors, folks who had come to know Theo over the past months. Janice brought wildflowers. Clara hung one of her drawings inside. Mike hammered in a small wooden plaque near the doorway. It read, "Nathan's Place, built with love, watched over by Theo." I don't remember much of what was said that day, just the warmth of the sun, the sound of laughter, and Theo stretched out on the cabin floor like he owned it. The cabin became our retreat, a quiet place when the world got too loud. Theo loved it there. He had a favorite spot by the window where the sunlight came in just right. Sometimes I'd wake from a nap and find him sitting there, staring out at the lake like he was remembering something only he knew. One evening, as we sat on the porch of the cabin, watching fireflies blink over the water, I said, "I wish Nathan could see this." Theo turned and licked my hand. Once. Softly. That night, I dreamed again. Nathan was building something, laughing, sawdust in his hair. Theo ran circles around him, barking with joy. They didn't speak, but the feeling was there. Spring melted fully into summer. Theo slowed down a bit more, took longer naps, but his spirit didn't dim. If anything, it deepened. He still greeted everyone with that quiet dignity, still followed me from room to room like he had something to protect. One hot afternoon, a girl named Sophie came by. Her family had just moved into the blue house on the corner. She couldn't have been more than 10, freckles across her nose and a sketch pad tucked under her arm. "Can I draw him?" she asked, pointing to Theo. "Of course," I said. She sat under the maple tree while Theo lay nearby. She didn't say much, just focused, tongue peeking out of the corner of her mouth as she worked. When she was done, she showed me the picture. It was Theo, all right, but drawn like a hero from a storybook. A little cape. A glowing heart. "I think he's magic," she said. "I think you're right." She gave me the drawing and ran off. I hung it in the cabin. And every time I looked at it, I believed it a little more. Because Theo wasn't just a dog. He was a bridge, a healer, a reminder. And somehow, he always knew exactly where to lead me next. The heat wave settled over town like a thick wool blanket nobody asked for. Everything slowed down. The streets buzzed with cicadas, air conditioners rattled in windows, and the only thing moving fast was the ice melting in everyone's lemonade. Even Theo, who normally insisted on his morning patrols, had taken to sprawling under the ceiling fan like a furry rug that occasionally snored. I adjusted his water bowl 3 times a day to keep it cool, and every afternoon around 4, I made us both a frozen treat. Mine was peach-iced tea. His was crushed ice with a splash of low-sodium broth. He loved it. Would crunch the ice, then look at me like I'd just given him front-row seats to the best show on earth. Despite the heat, life kept unfolding. Mike brought over a basket of tomatoes from his garden, saying, "The sun's angry, but at least it's growing things." Janice made ice bouquets, actual flowers in frozen molds, just for fun. Clara took to painting outside under the umbrella, Theo snoozing beside her while she dabbed color into canvas after canvas. One sweltering Tuesday, I took Theo for a short walk to the creek. We stuck to the shade, moving slow. When we reached the water, he waded in just up to his elbows and let out a sigh so loud I laughed. We weren't the only ones with the idea. A small group of kids were upstream skipping stones, and one of them, a boy named Eli, wandered over when he saw Theo. "Can I pet him?" he asked. "Sure, just go slow. It's hot, he might be a little tired." Theo stood perfectly still as Eli approached, tail wagging faintly. The boy touched his fur and smiled. "He feels like a big blanket," Eli said. "Yeah, a living one that hogs all the space." Eli giggled, then asked, "Is he a rescue?" "He is. Sort of rescued me too." Eli's smile faded a little. "My dad says I need rescuing sometimes." I didn't push. Just let that sit. "Can I come see him again?" "Anytime." We walked home slow. Theo seemed more alert on the way back, like he was guarding something bigger than me. That night, I got a message from the local library. They were hosting a summer reading event for kids and wondered if Theo and I could come. They'd read animal-themed books, and Theo could just hang out for the kids to pet. We showed up that Saturday morning. Theo wore his red bandana, freshly washed, and greeted every child like he'd memorized their birthdays. The kids adored him. They read stories, drew pictures, and by the end, one of the librarians had tears in her eyes. "That dog is healing," she whispered. "Not just sweet healing." On the way out, I passed a corkboard in the hallway with drawings the kids had done. One caught my eye. It was Theo again, this time with angel wings. Underneath, someone had written in crayon, "Guardian of Us." I stared at it for a long time. That afternoon, I asked Mike if he'd help me build a small bench under the tree in front of the cabin. Nothing fancy, just a place people could sit. He agreed immediately. We worked for a few hours while Theo supervised. When it was done, Clara came by and painted a small plaque for it. It read, "Sit, stay, heal." A few days later, Sophie came running up the porch steps. She was crying. Not loud. Just quiet tears and a clenched jaw. Theo was on his feet instantly. She sat beside him, buried her face in his fur, and let go. I sat on the steps nearby, not saying anything. Just waiting. After a while, she looked up. "My cat ran away." I nodded. "I'm sorry, Sophie. He always came home before, but it's been 2 days." Theo licked her cheek, then nudged her hand. She stayed with us a while, drew pictures on the porch, shared her popsicle with Theo. When she left, she said, "I think he makes the sad part smaller." We kept busy through the rest of summer. Theo and I would drive out to the cabin in the early mornings, sit on the porch, and listen to the woods wake up. Sometimes Mike would join us, sometimes Clara. Other times, it was just me and Theo, a thermos of tea, and the wind. People started leaving things on the bench. Notes, small drawings. One time, a pebble painted like a sunflower. I didn't touch any of it, just let it gather like pieces of gratitude. One Sunday, I came home to find a letter in the mailbox with no return address. Inside was a photo of Theo sitting by the lake, and a single sentence written beneath it. "You don't know how many hearts this dog has saved. Thank you." I put it in the box of keepsakes. Theo's steps grew slower as the season wore on, but not his spirit. He still got up with me every morning, still watched the house with quiet vigilance, still walked to the bench and waited, as if making sure it hadn't forgotten its purpose. One night, just before bed, I caught him staring out the window toward the lake. I followed his gaze, but didn't see anything. "What do you see out there?" I whispered. He turned, nudged my hand, and rested his head on my lap. I sat there a long time, my hand in his fur, the room lit only by the porch light and the hum of summer cicadas. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Theo had already said everything just by being here. And whatever came next, I knew. We weren't done yet. It was the kind of morning that made everything feel like a painting. The air had cooled just enough to make your lungs grateful, and the sun hadn't yet burned off the light mist rising from the grass. Theo was already standing at the door when I opened it, nose pointed toward the road like he had somewhere to be. We didn't follow our usual route. Instead, he turned left out of the gate and headed toward the church on Birch Street. I didn't question it. I'd learned by now that when Theo decided on a direction, there was usually a reason. We passed the bakery, where Mrs. Dobbins was setting out trays of cinnamon rolls, and the post office, where Curtis waved from behind the counter. Theo gave his usual dignified nods, a slow wag, and kept going. When we reached the church, the big oak doors were open. Inside, a few volunteers were setting up chairs and floral centerpieces. I recognized one of them, Carolyn, a retired teacher who now organized the town's weekly community group. She saw us and smiled. "We could use an extra pair of paws this morning." Theo walked in like he'd been invited. They were preparing for a remembrance gathering. Not a funeral, exactly, but a time to share stories and photos of loved ones lost. Carolyn asked if we'd stay. I hesitated. Theo didn't. He found a spot near the front row and sat down, perfectly still, like he knew the weight of the air. As people arrived, I stayed near the back, watching them trickle in with framed pictures, scrapbooks, and trembling hands. Some carried flowers. Others just brought memories. When the first speaker stood up, a woman in her 60s holding a photo of her younger brother. Theo got up, walked to her, and sat beside her feet. She glanced down, eyes widening, then smiled through her tears. She kept her hand on his head the whole time she spoke. That's how it went for the next hour. Every person who spoke, Theo somehow knew to walk to them. Not all the way, sometimes just halfway down the aisle, sometimes just a glance, but always at the right moment, as if he could sense the ache, measure it, and offer the exact dose of comfort required. Afterward, a man approached me outside. "I don't know what it is about that dog," he said, "but I haven't cried in 10 years. I sat in there and cried like a kid." We walked home slowly. Theo looked tired, but peaceful. That night he slept deeper than usual, legs twitching in some kind of dream I couldn't follow. In the morning, I found a thank you note slid under the door. No name, just a drawing of Theo under the words, "You helped me remember gently." That week, more people came to visit the bench by the cabin. Some stayed for minutes, some for hours. A woman named Gwen brought her mother's favorite book and read aloud for nearly an hour. A teenager sat with headphones on, eyes closed, as if letting the quiet rearrange something inside him. I never asked questions. Neither did Theo. One afternoon, Mike and I installed a small wooden box near the bench, like a free library but for notes. A place people could write whatever they needed to let go of. Within days, it was full. Folded papers, envelopes, even a few Polaroids. Theo sniffed each one before I slid them into a larger box at home. I didn't read them. They weren't for me, just pieces of weight someone had carried too long. The following Saturday, Clara brought over a young man named Joel. He was an artist, quiet, but with eyes that moved like they were always taking notes. He asked if he could paint a mural on the side of the cabin. "I want it to be about him," he said, pointing to Theo. He came back the next day with paints and brushes, and over the next week, a scene came to life on the wooden wall. Theo, standing on a path that stretched in both directions, behind him a trail of paw prints, ahead of him a gentle sunrise. In the corner, Joel painted the words, "Some paths are found by those who never stopped looking." When he finished, he knelt beside Theo and whispered something. Theo pressed his forehead to Joel's, then walked away with the calm of someone who knew his job had been done right. By late August, the town had unofficially dubbed the cabin Theo's place. Kids used it for art days. Older folks came to read. Couples sat on the bench in silence, hands linked loosely like they didn't want to disturb the air. And Theo? He simply kept showing up. Every morning, every afternoon, he'd check the spot like a caretaker. He'd sniff the breeze, inspect the garden, and rest by the bench until his bones told him it was time to head home. One Sunday, as we sat under the maple tree near the house, I looked at him and said, "I think you're building something here." He didn't lift his head, just thumped his tail twice. That evening, I heard a knock. It was Sophie, holding a shoebox. She opened it to reveal her missing cat, dusty, skinny, but alive. "He came back," she said, beaming. And I think Theo knew he would. Theo sniffed the cat once, then turned in a circle and flopped down, as if to say, "Told you." We had dinner on the porch that night. Grilled cheese for me, shredded chicken for Theo. The stars came out slow, and the moon rose behind a wispy veil of clouds. I felt something settle inside me. Not an answer, not a conclusion, just a kind of peace I hadn't known I was waiting for. Theo shifted, nudged his head under my hand, and sighed. And in that moment, I knew we were exactly where we were meant to be. Still moving, still making space, still not finished yet. The first day of September arrived with a hush, like the world was holding its breath between seasons. The trees hadn't yet changed, but the air was different. Drier, quieter. Theo noticed it too. He moved slower now, more deliberate, choosing his paths like someone memorizing their own footsteps. We didn't stop walking, though. He still rose each morning at 6:42, still nudged me toward the door even on days when my bones felt stiff or my mind wandered elsewhere. It wasn't about distance anymore. It was about showing up. And Theo never missed. That week, Sophie brought her cat over to visit. It had been just over a month since he'd come back, and now he trailed her like a sidekick, silent and proud. She named him Marbles because of the way he darted across the floor like one. Theo and Marbles didn't play, not exactly, but they had an understanding. Marbles would curl up near Theo's tail, or sometimes rest one paw on his back. Theo never moved away. Just let him stay there, like it was perfectly natural. We sat outside as the sun dipped behind the trees, Sophie sketching while Marbles purred and Theo dozed. She handed me a new drawing, a picture of all three of them in the backyard, beneath the string lights. "You should hang this at the cabin," she said. "It belongs there." I did just that the next morning, placing it near the window beside Clara's portrait and Joel's mural photo. The wall was filling up now, not cluttered, curated. Every item felt like a thread in the larger story Theo had been weaving without ever saying a word. Later that day, I got a call from the high school. Mr. Pritchard, the art teacher, wanted to invite Clara and me to speak at their creative showcase. He'd heard about the cabin, the drawings, the mural. He wanted his students to understand what community storytelling looked like, what it felt like. I asked if Theo could come. "He's the centerpiece, right?" Mr. Pritchard said. "Wouldn't be the same without him." We went the following Friday. The school auditorium was filled with easels, sculptures, and photo collages. The moment we walked in, the room changed. Students gathered around Theo, some crouching, others sketching right there on the floor. Clara spoke first, sharing how drawing Theo had unlocked something quiet in her she hadn't realized was waiting. I followed, talking about Nathan, the first video, the walk that changed everything. Then one of the students raised her hand. "What's Theo to you? Like, who is he?" I looked down at him, sitting calmly between my feet, ears flicking every so often. "He's the one who reminded me what matters," I said, "and the one who keeps reminding me. Every day." That night, as we walked home, Theo stopped beside the park gate. It was an old habit. He liked to watch the swings, even when no one was on them. This time there was a boy sitting alone on the far end, maybe 12, small for his age. Theo watched him for a long moment, then walked straight over. I followed at a distance, waiting. The boy didn't flinch when Theo sat beside him. He looked at him, looked away, then said something I couldn't hear. They sat like that for almost 10 minutes. When the boy finally stood up, he wiped his eyes and walked past me. "That's a good dog," he said. "He listens better than people do." Theo led me home slowly that night, like every step needed remembering. At home, I gave him an extra blanket. He curled up without a sound, but every so often he opened one eye to check on me. I pretended not to notice, just kept the light on and wrote in my notebook. People had started asking if they could visit the cabin more often. Not for events, just to sit. To think. A woman left a small wind chime hanging by the window. A man brought a carving of his old retriever and placed it under the bench. One couple showed up with a tiny box of wedding photos and sat together in silence for over an hour. When they left, they whispered to Theo, then nodded at me, tears in both their eyes. It felt like the place had a heartbeat now. A few days later, we were invited to a local podcast recording. A segment called Stories That Stay wanted to interview people who'd made a quiet impact in their communities. I hesitated at first, but they insisted Theo was the story. I brought along the brass tag, the journal page, and the newest photo of Sophie's drawing. We sat in a cozy studio above the bookstore, and I spoke while Theo lay at my feet, snoring lightly halfway through. Afterward, the host leaned over and said, "You know, I think this dog remembers more than any of us ever will." And maybe she was right. That weekend, rain came through in steady sheets. Theo hated storms, not because of the thunder, but the restlessness they brought. He paced. He watched the windows. He leaned against my leg like he was keeping me grounded. When the power flickered, I lit candles and pulled out an old board game. Theo watched the pieces move, then fell asleep with his chin on the rulebook. The next day, the skies cleared, and everything smelled new again. We walked down to the cabin, checking the path for debris. Nothing was damaged. The bench was still dry, the mural untouched. But on the windowsill, someone had left a single white feather. No note, no explanation. I left it there. As September moved on, Theo began waking me up a little later. Not much. 6:48, then 6:53, a slow drift forward, like time itself was learning to stretch. He still came to the door, still wagged his tail, still sat by the bench watching the lake. And I kept following. Whatever he was building, whatever story he was still helping write, I knew we were just at another chapter. Not the end. Not even close. Because Theo never stopped finding the next place to go. And I never stopped going with him. Theo woke up slower that morning. It wasn't drastic, just different. No gentle woof at the exact time, no light scrape of paw against wood. Instead, he stretched once, long and slow, then settled again with a soft sigh. I sat on the edge of the bed, hand resting on his back, and waited until his eyes blinked open. We didn't go for a walk right away. We just sat on the porch, the two of us watching the fog lift off the grass. He rested his chin on my foot, eyes half closed, soaking in the stillness. That silence felt heavier than usual. Full, not empty. By midday, the fog burned off and a breeze picked up, cool and familiar. I packed us some food, water, and his favorite blanket. We headed to the cabin, slow and steady, stopping every few steps so he could sniff a bush or watch a squirrel dart past. I didn't rush him. There was no need. At the cabin, he didn't go to the bench. He went straight to the doorway and lay down in the patch of sun that poured through the window. I spread the blanket next to him, sat down, and opened the journal I'd started a month ago, the one just for him. I read him pages aloud. Memories, quotes, things people had said about him, about what he meant to them. A few lines from Nathan's old journal. Theo's tail moved once with each pause, like he was marking the rhythm of the words. After a while, Clara stopped by. She didn't say much, just knelt beside him and set down a new sketch. It was a portrait of him in the sun, eyes closed, peaceful. She placed it beside the mural, added a flower from her garden, and kissed the top of his head. Mike Gazette came later with a thermos of coffee and a story about his first dog, the one who used to ride in the passenger seat with his head out the window, wind catching his ears like sails. He chuckled, reached down to pet Theo, and said, "You're one of the good ones, buddy. The best ones." More visitors came, not because they were called, but because they felt it. Sophie brought Marbles, who curled beside Theo like he belonged there. Janice left a fresh bouquet on the bench. Even Joel returned, sitting quietly in the grass, sketchpad in hand, as if capturing something he couldn't say aloud. Theo didn't move much that afternoon, just stayed in the sunlight, eyes drifting closed, ears twitching now and then to the sounds around him. He looked content, whole, like everything in the world had found its rightful place. I stayed with him long after everyone else left, watched the sky turn from gold to lavender, then to a soft, deep blue. Fireflies blinked in the distance. The lake whispered behind us. Theo's breathing grew softer, slower, a tide pulling gently back. I spoke to him, told him how proud I was, how grateful, how every step he'd taken had left something behind for someone else to hold on to. I told him he'd done more in his quiet way than most people ever dared to try. And when the last bit of light faded, Theo looked at me one more time. A full gaze. Clear. Steady. Then he rested his head on my hand and closed his eyes. The night was quiet. In the morning, I buried him under the oak tree behind the cabin. We'd already made the spot months ago, just in case. Clara brought the first stone. Mike carved the second. Sophie placed her sketch on the small wooden post we hammered into the ground, and I added the brass name tag, the one I'd cleaned so many times, to a ring of smooth river stones around the base. The bench filled again with flowers. The little box for notes overflowed. People came, people cried, people remembered, but no one said goodbye. Instead, they said thank you. Thank you for the walks. Thank you for the silence. Thank you for the hand licks and the quiet looks and the way you made grief feel like something gentle. The cabin never emptied. Theo's place never dimmed. His name lived on in every drawing, every visit, every story passed from one person to another. And I kept walking. Not every day, not always at 6:42, but often enough to feel like I was still being led. Sometimes I still feel the pressure of a head on my foot, or hear the creak of floorboards at dawn. I smile, I nod, and I keep going, because Theo may have stopped walking beside me, but he never stopped showing the way. Months passed. Leaves turned gold and fell like slow confetti, blanketing the cabin trail in crisp whispers. The town kept growing. New faces, new stories. But somehow, Theo stayed in the air, in the quiet corners, in the habits people didn't know they had, until they missed them. Janice started hosting small Sunday morning gatherings at the cabin. Just tea and conversation. Sometimes a reading, sometimes just silence. Everyone called it Theo time. Kids came with stories. Adults came with memories. There was no agenda, just presence. One day, Sophie brought a class project, a miniature version of the cabin made from popsicle sticks and glue, complete with a tiny wooden dog curled beside the bench. It won first place in the regional fair. She left it inside the real cabin, beside the window, with a note. For the next kid who needs a friend. That same week, the town council voted to make the cabin an official community space. No one argued. They added a new sign at the entrance trail. Welcome to Theo's place, where hearts rest. More notes filled the box, some in crayon, some typed, some barely legible from tears. I never opened them, but I knew their weight. I kept adding to the journal, new entries, new reflections. Every so often, I'd leave it open on the bench for others to write in. People did. They always did. One evening, I sat alone under the oak tree, the breeze carrying faint laughter from somewhere down the trail. I watched the sun filter through the leaves and thought about how one dog had created all of this, not with effort, not with intention, but simply by being exactly who he was. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Still with me?" A breeze passed, soft and warm. A bird called from a nearby branch. And just for a second, the leaves rustled like footsteps on the path. I opened my eyes and smiled. Still with me indeed.